By 2013, the northeastern state of Borno had become the epicenter of chaos. Boko Haram, once a fringe Islamist sect, evolved into Nigeria's most feared terror group. They weren't just attacking, they were conquering. Town after town fell into their grip. Gwoza, Bama, Dikwa, and dozens more were overrun with alarming ease. The group used lightning assaults, heavily armed convoys of pickup trucks mounted with machine guns, storming villages at dawn. Militants chanted in Arabic and Hausa, firing indiscriminately. Civilians were executed for resisting, or simply for refusing to join. Schools were burned. Teachers beheaded. Government buildings were reduced to rubble. Anyone associated with Western education was targeted. In some villages, entire male populations were lined up and shot. Boko Haram fighters moved quickly, planting IEDs and torching homes before Nigerian forces could respond. When the military did arrive, they were often outgunned or ambushed. Soldiers deserted, bases were abandoned, and massive weapon stockpiles fell into militant hands. In 2014, Boko Haram declared a caliphate in Gwoza, claiming they now ruled a part of Nigerian territory. From there, their violence only grew. Women were kidnapped en masse, some taken as wives, others trained as suicide bombers. Children were forcibly recruited, drugged, and turned into foot soldiers. Entire populations fled into forests or across borders, seeking safety in makeshift camps. By the end of 2014, Boko Haram controlled an area nearly the size of Belgium. The Nigerian state was losing the northeast. The army had collapsed. And for civilians trapped inside the war zone, there was nowhere left to run. This was not just insurgency. It was occupation through terror. As Boko Haram's power surged, the Nigerian state launched its first major counteroffensive. In 2011, Operation Restore Order was born, a brutal attempt to regain control of Maiduguri and crush the group's expanding urban footprint. The battlefield was no longer forest or desert, it was city blocks. Maiduguri, once the bustling capital of Borno, became a war zone. Boko Haram had embedded itself into neighborhoods, using mosques, houses, and schools as weapons depots and command centers. The Nigerian army responded with overwhelming force. Entire districts were cordoned off. Door-to-door raids became routine. Homes were ransacked, suspects dragged out, and beaten in the street. Intelligence came from shaky informants and intercepted calls, often leading to false arrests. Nigerian forces established kill zones, trap areas with sniper nests and machine gun emplacements. Helicopters hovered above, surveillance drones buzzed day and night. The city was locked down. Civilian life disintegrated. Markets closed, power failed, and schools emptied. Families fled to nearby towns. But some stayed, caught between militants who executed anyone accused of cooperating and soldiers who didn't hesitate to use deadly force. The military's tactics were aggressive. Convoys of armored personnel carriers swept through alleyways. EOD teams defused IEDs planted in roads. Army engineers erected checkpoints at every junction. But Boko Haram adapted, using teenagers as suicide bombers and melting into the crowd before strikes. In retaliation, Boko Haram turned Maiduguri into a furnace of blood. Bombings became daily. Police stations, barracks, mosques, and markets were all targets. Militants struck quickly, then vanished. The streets trembled with ambushes and reprisal killings. By late 2013, the army had retaken control of most of Maiduguri, but at a cost. Thousands were dead. Trust between civilians and soldiers had shattered. Allegations of extrajudicial killings, torture, and mass detentions began to surface. Operation Restore Order worked tactically, but failed to win hearts and minds. Still, for the first time, Boko Haram felt pressure. They began withdrawing from cities and regrouping in the countryside, especially deep inside Sambisa Forest. The war was shifting, and so was the battlefield. By 2015, Boko Haram's urban influence was crumbling, but their most dangerous weapon remained intact: Sambisa Forest. The sprawling jungle, once a wildlife reserve, had become an ungoverned fortress. Dozens of Boko Haram camps hid beneath thick canopies. From here, they launched suicide attacks, trained child soldiers, and held hostages, including the infamous Chibok girls. The Nigerian military knew it had to take Sambisa. But this was no ordinary battlefield. GPS failed. Roads vanished into bush. The forest swallowed everything: troops, vehicles, even air support. Operation Crackdown was launched. Thousands of soldiers from the Army, Special Forces, and Air Force stormed the region from multiple axes. Drones mapped heat signatures. Helicopters dropped commandos behind enemy lines. Artillery hammered known camps. The fight was vicious. Militants had laid thousands of IEDs, strung across jungle paths and buried beneath foliage. Every step was a risk. Night raids turned into firefights. Trees exploded. Boko Haram fighters used the terrain expertly. They vanished into tunnels and attacked from dugouts. Suicide bombers emerged from shrub lines. Entire battalions vanished in green fog. To survive, the Nigerian army adapted. They used thermal drones, K9 units, and bush-trained pathfinders. Rocket artillery flattened suspected camps, and bombers hit targets relayed by recon drones. Soldiers rescued scores of women and children, chained, starved, traumatized. Boko Haram supply lines began to collapse. Their commanders fled or were captured. Camps were torched one by one. By December 2016, the government declared Sambisa Forest liberated. But the cost was high. Thousands were dead, many missing. The forest had been won, but the war was far from over. While the Nigerian army battled Boko Haram in forests and cities, a new force emerged from the shadows of a war: the Civilian Joint Task Force, or CJTF. They weren't soldiers. They had no formal training. But they were locals, hunters, bike taxi riders, tailors, students, Nigerians who had lost homes, families, or futures to the terror. What they lacked in weapons, they made up for in knowledge. They knew every alley in Maiduguri, every trail in Bama, every whisper of Boko Haram movement. With machetes, clubs, and later seized rifles, they organized patrols and began rooting out militants from their own streets. The CJTF became the People's Army. Roadside checkpoints made of tires. Their intel? Gossip, text messages, and gut instinct. Boko Haram feared them. These weren't outsiders, they were neighbors. The CJTF knew which houses were being used as safe houses. They exposed couriers and recruiters. Soon, the Nigerian army took notice. The government began to arm and coordinate with the CJTF. Militias were absorbed into joint operations, given uniforms, radios, even salaries. In street battles, CJTF fighters fought shoulder to shoulder with military squads. In rural villages, they chased fleeing insurgents into bush paths and dry riverbeds. But the cost was heavy. Boko Haram retaliated with horrifying brutality, kidnapping CJTF members' families, executing suspects in public squares, booby-trapping homes. And not every CJTF unit was clean. Some used the war as cover for revenge killings. Others looted, tortured, or framed enemies. The line between justice and vengeance blurred. Still, their impact was undeniable. Towns that had been lost were slowly reclaimed. Children returned to school. Markets reopened. In many places, it wasn't the army that saved the day. It was the ordinary people who stood up to terror. By 2016, the CJTF had over 20,000 active fighters across Borno State. Armed with resolve, machetes, and homegrown courage, they had become a frontline in Nigeria's war against Boko Haram. By 2017, Nigerian officials declared victory. Sambisa Forest was liberated. Boko Haram was on the run, and towns flew the national flag once more. But beneath the surface, the war never ended. Boko Haram had fractured, but wasn't defeated. Its deadliest wing, known as ISWAP, Islamic State West Africa Province, emerged as a more organized and strategic terror group. ISWAP moved operations to Lake Chad and the northeastern borders. There, they built new bases on islands, launched cross-border raids, and taxed local fishermen for weapons and food. Their targets shifted from random market bombs to military ambushes and garrisons. The Nigerian military adapted. They set up forward operating bases, used armed drones, and partnered with the Chadian and Nigerian armies. But attacks kept coming. Checkpoints were overrun, bases torched, and soldiers ambushed on dusty roads. Civilians paid the highest price. Entire villages fled to IDP camps, internally displaced person zones, built from tarps and mud. In these camps, hunger replaced fear. Children starved. Water was scarce. And in the distance, gunfire never stopped. Boko Haram still sent suicide bombers, now mostly teenage girls strapped with vests. Farmers avoided their fields. Roads were mined. In Borno alone, over 2 million people were displaced. Yet, hope survived. Schools reopened in Maiduguri. Girls returned to classrooms. even under tight security. NGOs, the Red Cross, and local teachers rebuilt slowly. The CJTF continued to patrol. Former fighters became counselors. The Nigerian army improved civilian coordination, reduced collateral damage, and increased intelligence cooperation. But the scars remain. Parents still wait for missing daughters. Forests still hide armed cells. The war changed forms, but never truly ended. The battle for Borno may be out of the headlines, but for those who lived it, every day still echoes with the war.